on my screen? Excellent. Does anyone have a preference for, and this is volunteer basis only, so does anyone see anything that they would be excited to share with the group? Okay, and so use cases and scenarios, who was that, please? Okay. Okay. Well, I hope you feel better. Okay. Okay. So that can do data dictionary? Did you say sequence diagrams? And who is that? Oops, sorry. I want to spell your name right. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Anyone else interested in the last four? We have data mining, process modeling, scope modeling, and state modeling. If anyone changes their mind at any point in the process, please feel free to speak up, because we love having the multiple perspectives for the learning process. Okay. Any questions on those assignments? So I will start with the knowledge area intro for requirements analysis and design. We'll take a short break to give everyone an opportunity to brush up on these items in your technique guide, and then we will get started on those after the break. So let me get the recordings are placed in, sorry, I'm trying to multitask while talking to you. The recordings are placed out in YouTube, and they'll probably be available by the end of the evening. You bet. Does anyone have any other questions before we move into the content of the session? Excellent. As always, I welcome interruption. I am a very informal educator, so I really enjoy the back and forth collaboration. So I will give you opportunities. I'll pause off and on, but please do not wait for such. If you have any questions or thoughts, please speak up in the moment that you have them. Okay, so let's get started on this. Typically, when LN would share this, LN from Adaptive, when he would start this off, he would tell a story of ZenBank. And I don't know all of the details of his story, but I can give you the gist of it. So the point of the ZenBank is that he came into a project a little bit late. And he found, when he came into this project to resurrect it from potential disaster, that requirements analysis and design had not truly been done, or at least had not been done well. And when you look at statistics on requirements and project success, obviously they say poor requirements are one of, if not the number one cause of failure, regardless of methodology. You know, they got Agile in there to try to increase the success of getting projects done as quickly as possible And if you're not careful with everything that you're doing on any methodology, and you don't get the requirements right, and you don't have thoughtful conversation with good understanding, what happens is similar to what happened at Zen Bank, where you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of issues, whether they are incorrect requirements or true failure of quality assurance processes because things were not done well. And so the cost of fixing those things when you're that far into an effort is significantly higher. So they say that the cost of a requirement exponentially increases from the point of strategic analysis to post-production. So if you find a requirement really early in the process, for example, in strategic analysis, where many organizations unfortunately do not engage the business analyst, a requirement only costs $1. That same requirement, if you don't find it or you correct it post-production, costs $200. And so in between there, it's like $5 if you find it in elicitation, and $10 if you find it after requirements analysis and design, and $20 if you find it in development, $50 if you find it in QA, so on and so forth. So it's a bit of an exponential increase. Almost, it at least doubles, if not more so, at each step of the way. So understanding requirements early in the process and stopping and thinking about them is critical to the success. And that doesn't mean, a lot of people hear that and they think this is going to take forever. A lot of people see a business analyst come in, and if the business analyst wants to do it right instead of just fast, they think red flags, and they think it's going to take forever, and they think that we're going to get stuck in analysis paralysis, but that doesn't have to be the case. How you go about the combination of elicitation, strategic analysis, and requirements analysis and design, it can greatly increase the speed at which you deliver very good requirements, as opposed to just trying to jump straight into the deep end head first. All right. So people say the devil's in the details, and that's where people say the devil's in the details it means that you need to find the details because that's what can get you if you don't get into the details. This is in your way. So for business analysts, the details are very important, and it helps us ensure that we understand what we're trying to accomplish so that we provide the right solution for the right reasons at the right time. So what is requirements analysis and design? And why is it so important? And that's what we're going to cover now. Have you ever been in a project that starts like this? Hey, you guys go ahead and start working. I'll go figure out what they want. Right? How can we build something that we don't know? Have you guys ever seen, there's a little Dilbert. One of my favorites is a little Dilbert cartoon, and Dilbert's talking to a business individual, and he's asking her, what do you need? What problem are you trying to solve? What do you need a system to do? And she's like, I don't know what I need it to do. And Dilbert's telling her, I need to know what you need it to do so that I can build something that does what you need it to do. And she's like, well, can you just build me something that tells me what I need? So it can be very, very frustrating getting information out of people. But once you have that information, once you've done your elicitation and you have information, what do you do with it? Requirements analysis and design is where we actually specify the requirements. And it's not just about specification, and we don't necessarily do it the same way for every project, for every stakeholder. It's all about doing the requirements and presenting them in a way that allows every stakeholder to understand what we're trying to accomplish. And different stakeholders have different views, right? And this says that allows developers to develop systems, but that's not necessarily the case, because I work on a lot of projects that don't necessarily have developers. I might work on a a problem or an opportunity that the only thing I change is a process, or the only thing I do is prove out to leadership that their stakeholders, that their users aren't understanding their system correctly and need training. So it could be organizational change, it could be procedural change, maybe we're using the wrong data, Or maybe we are using the wrong system, or maybe the system we're using isn't effective enough and we have to modify it, and then you would have developers. But it's all about ensuring that everyone understands what the need is and that the way we present it is according to what that stakeholder cares about and what they need to understand. So that's what's really important about requirements analysis and design. So your stakeholders will need a certain level of detail, but your technologists, replace the word developers with technologists. Technologists will need more detailed requirements. Whether it's a software application we're developing from scratch, or whether it's a vendor that's working with you and they need to understand, what fields do you need configured? What are your lookup values that you need? Things like that. They will need those details. And those details, although the business isn't necessarily pivotal with them, they do need to read them and understand them and approve them so that we ensure that what we are given to our technologists is appropriate. Now remember, if we don't do this knowledge area well, we can have a very large number of requirement changes down the road, throughout as well. But the problem is that those requirements changes will often happen later in the process when they are the most expensive. Okay, so how do we typically present information to people? Well, and we can give tables, right? A tabular format, like Excel or something similar to that, or a database-driven table. We might provide formulas. We might give a physical model. This is very, very seldom. This you're going to find a lot more in like architectural engineering and things like that. Simulations, again, not a real high percentage. That would be if you are actually building some prototypes that are workable prototypes, but that doesn't happen very often. Most often, we communicate in pictures. And that's why you see diagrams being 80%. Even in architectural engineering, we still communicate primarily in pictures. For example, we will have a building schematic, right? We'll have a floor plan that we will lay out. And that's how we most often communicate the structure or the solution we're looking for in a home. And this is why pictures are so important. Could you imagine trying to explain what you're looking at on this screen with words instead of this schematic? I mean, how complicated would that be? And how likely could it be that someone is going to misunderstand something, right? So one of the problems would be if you tried to verbally explain this, right? Or maybe someone got this wrong in the first place and they were like, okay, wait, if I put the guest bedroom door here, I have to go through the master bedroom to get there. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I'm pretty sure that we don't want guests coming through our personal bedroom. So we also can use pictures to communicate difference. We can then later update the schematic, give it to them. Red means, okay, I removed this and I put it here instead. But I still need this door because I have to be able to get to my master bedroom. So easily, whoever is working with you, the technologist, can easily see from the last one to this one what has changed, so I don't have to really read and understand the entire thing again. I can focus on the differences because I already understood kitchen, second bedroom, things like that. Any questions about that so far? So that's just the high-level understanding of what is requirements analysis and design. We're going to talk about inputs and outputs in a moment. Okay, so what goes into this knowledge area? Requirements in any state. They can be just recently elicited, or you can be further down the road and you've analyzed them, but you are having to reanalyze them given new information. How we manage that information, are we storing it? Are we baselining it? Are we things like that? Knowing that is important for how you manage the requirements analysis and design process. Elicitation results, because elicitation results in requirements. So you might just have the results of elicitation that you may have created some requirements off of, but maybe not. Potential value. What's the value we're looking for? What's the scope of our solution? Because when I'm doing requirements analysis and design, understanding the scope helps me define which of those requirements may be out of scope, because that's just as important as in. What is the change strategy we are working with? And once we've done all of that and applied those inputs and pushed those inputs all the way through the requirements analysis and design knowledge area, we will come out with specified and modeled requirements. And in many ways, the word modeled is the most important of those two words. Verified, yes. Correct. Elicitation results are just elicitation results. You can validate the results of elicitation, but elicitation results are specifically, they're just a regurgitation of what you believe you heard. It's not it's not it's not analyzed information at that point. It isn't necessarily verified or validated. It just is what it is, and it's raw. But you have to have that information to create requirements so that you can model them. Does that make sense? Say that one more time, please. Uh-huh. Right. Hmm. It could. It could. So one of the important things to keep in mind is business analysis is a very fluid discipline. So when you say requirements in any state, you have to have raw requirements to do any kind of modeling or specification in the beginning. And so, I mean, all I can tell you is what I have found most successful. So I put my understanding of where people are, I put that in pictures with process models, get that validated so that when I extract, because I'll extract requirements both from the spoken concerns of the individuals, of my stakeholders, plus the understanding of the valid current state, right? And it's the two of those that I'm going to analyze. And requirements in any state, when I receive those, when I receive elicitation results, I'm going to extract requirements from that. Elicitation results will include also current state, right? So I've elicited current state, I've elicited pains, I've elicited wants and things like that, pains and needs and all that kind of good stuff. I've evaluated all of these things. I've analyzed this, requirements analysis. I've generated some requirements. I've analyzed those requirements against one another to validate, do these look consistent, do any of them conflict with one another, things like that. So I do one level of verification. I do verification and then I go get that validated. Now, before I start modeling with use cases or screen mockups or anything like that, I will actually get written requirements validated. But my requirements that I get validated are high level. I don't like putting a ton of words in front of anybody before I start modeling. I keep that very simple. And then I model, and then once I've modeled and that gets validated, I do the detailed requirements, because at that point, detailed requirements are where you could spend a lot of inappropriate time if you don't understand what you're doing and if you haven't validated that you are in sync with your stakeholders. So in that case, yes, it could be a hindrance. We will get into some of those details throughout this knowledge area, but I will say that yes, if you are not careful and if you are not flexible in your process as a business analyst, it can definitely slow you down. So it's all about knowing what is the most appropriate what is the most appropriate approach from a technique standpoint and from a process standpoint, so that you don't waste any unnecessary time. But yes, it can be a hindrance if you're not careful. Does that help? You bet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love your positive perspective spin. I do know because that's I'm all about the P3 practicing positive perspective. So and within that same vein that she just shared with you, if you happened to do all of this work because you thought you understood a requirement and you find out that you did not, so you've spent this time that you feel is unnecessary, you don't have to look at it as unnecessary because it's a learning process. And the only way you're going to find out that you misunderstood sometimes is to do the modeling, right? And because it's when you put it in pictures that people start putting themselves in that moment and experiencing the work that they're trying to explain to you that they need help with. And that's when you'll find that you may have misunderstood their need, but that's still a valuable thing. And you wouldn't delete it, you wouldn't remove it, you would just put reject. You would have a status of reject, and we'll talk about that with state transitions too. Any other thoughts before we cover outputs? Okay, so when you are done with this knowledge area, again, specified and modeled requirements is what should come out of it. Your requirements should be verified and they should be validated, and those two things are different. You will have a requirements architecture that supports what you are trying to accomplish. You will have some options for a solution design, and that's where you talk about buy, build, do nothing. Maybe you've got a couple of vendors you're comparing against one another, things like that. And then out of those design options, you will have a solution recommendation based on your findings. Now, it's still up to the business or your stakeholder that you are performing business analysis for. They still have to choose which way they want to go. However, you should recommend based on an objective reasoning on which of those design options do you feel most appropriately meets the need that was stated and verified. Okay? And what helps us along the way? Well, if we're lucky, we might have a tool that's about architecture management. That could also be requirements management tool. Business objectives will help ensure that we are keeping in mind what we're trying to accomplish with our requirements. Current state, just like Google, we have to know where we are and what we're using to get there today. So I'm walking, I'm driving, I'm taking a taxi, and where we're trying to go so that we can know what's the best method to get from and to. These three things go together to help guide us along the way of defining what is the most appropriate solution option. Legal and regulatory information, particularly if you're in an area that's highly regulated like oil and gas, healthcare, things like that. And what methodologies and frameworks are you working within? Are you doing waterfall? Are you doing agile? Are you doing highly iterative? What is the methodology that you are trying to work within? Because that can impact the way that you deliver or the tools that you use to deliver. We will definitely get there very, very soon. There are two sections in here that are all about verification and validation. I, yeah. Water, wait, Kim. You call them what? I like that. Uh-huh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a lot better than Fall, isn't it? Because that fragile. That's awesome. So, given time, I most definitely will talk about that. I just finished speaking in Iowa about the future of business analysis and what I had to say. I know some people were really excited to hear it, and some people were a little bit resistant, but I was not surprised at that because what's ahead of us is going to require a lot more from us than any specific methodology. So I'm passionate about, that's one of the subject matters I'm very passionate about because it has caused me much angst in several organizations I've been in, and it's a bit frustrating. So it would be very cathartic for me to have a conversation with you about that if you are interested. But one of the things I do have to ensure that we do is the cover the information in this module for you to ensure that you're ready for CBAP. But on a break, anyone that wants to hang back, anyone that's like really comfortable with their topics or whatnot, if you want to hang back and talk about that, I will most definitely chat with you about that. I had some stuff to say. You bet. All right, what other guidelines and tools? If you're doing process modeling, following appropriate modeling notations is most appropriate. That way you have to explain less and it's very standardized. Standardization is really, really important for efficiency and effectiveness. Keeping in mind what is the potential value for the future. Oftentimes we try to solve this problem, but we lose sight of where we could go with something and put it in place in such a way to still be able to take advantage of that. Tracing requirements. That's very, very helpful, especially if you are doing an iterative approach. So if you wind up changing one requirement and you haven't done good requirements documentation that allows traceability, which Agile doesn't support, it's one of my frustrations with that methodology, is that if you change one thing, you can just, especially if you've got a cool tool, you can run a report and see every other process, every other screen, every other requirement that impacts. Requirements architecture is very important. It will help you ensure that you're doing quality documentation. RLCM, Requirements Lifecycle Management Tools, that's where I was telling you an enterprise requirements management tool is really helpful. Risk analysis results and your solution scope. Solution scope is different than project scope, so keep that in mind. We can talk about that difference too. I believe we will get into that a little bit in one of the future slide decks. Oh my gosh, there's so many techniques in this area. I don't want to try to talk about each of these. You should have your technique handbook. The BABOK, the test, I don't think dives really deep into any of the techniques necessarily. The BABOK itself does not cover techniques in significant detail. You can't learn how to do any of the techniques with the BABOK. It's just you have to research those techniques on the side. And so there are so many techniques, and we will only be covering, I think it's like 7 to 10, I can't remember. But there are tons of techniques that go into this knowledge area, and if we tried to cover all of these, we would never stay on time. We are still in the first half of the alphabet, people. Sorry. There are like 5 slides on this. We will be covering some of these. The ones in red used to be the ones that were covered in this module, but that is no longer the case, so don't pay any mind to that. I love mind mapping. I'm not a fan of non-functional, but we do them. So we still have another slide to go, guys. Prototyping is extremely powerful because it's pictures, pictures, pictures. I do the screen mock-ups. I don't do usable prototypes, but I do throwaways. So many, and I don't even believe this is the last slide. Maybe this is the last slide. We will cover state modeling. We will cover use cases. And that is it. So that's the preface. So you have your assignments to prepare yourself for the technique covering. We will take a 15-minute break, actually a little bit less than 15 minutes if you are okay with that. It is, do you guys, are you okay with a 10-minute break so we can start at the 15-minute mark? It's 9:05 for me, and that might be other hours for you. Some of you, that would be the 15-minute mark. Some of you, that would be a 45-minute mark, I believe. Would 10 minutes be acceptable? Okay, you bet. So I will ask real quick, do you want to have the conversation about the methodology, or does everyone want to stop and prepare? My thoughts? So if you're really comfortable with data modeling, then you and I can chat and I'll tell you what my thoughts are. And I will leave this recording so anyone that wants to hear my thoughts, but they need time to study, they can hear it back on the recording. So here are my thoughts. Waterfall is where everything began, right? Plan, 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 plan. And we know why Agile came about with the Agile Manifesto and the authors of it. And honestly, it was started by a bunch of developers who were really frustrated at doing all of this coding only to find out once they delivered it that their work was useless because things had changed. So Agile was born. Now, the problem also at that time was that there were not a great number of really skilled business analysts out there yet. We didn't have any standardized processes, we didn't have any standardized techniques, nothing. So we weren't consistent in our documentation. So they came up with Agile using just user stories and acceptance and evaluation criteria. And that is much easier to write, but it's very, very disjointed. It's very hard to see these 20 stories go together to make the real story, right? That's why I like to call those actual it's so weird to me. User stories and use cases are very backwards. A use case implies a singular case. A user story sounds more robust, right? It sounds like a story is being told. So I really think they're swapped. That's just my logical brain not being able to make sense of something. But so the intention of the Agile process with user stories and evaluation acceptance was not intended to be Agile wasn't intended to prescribe any one particular method of documentation. User stories and the acceptance criteria just became the standardized expectation, but it is not prescribed in Agile. And then they started, just like every other change I see in many situations, not just business analysis and change management, just in the world, is that when we have this problem, and this is where you and I as business analysts probably get a bit frustrated, we come into a situation and someone says, well, I had this problem, so I put this solution in place. Well, did you stop to really think about it? Did you take a step back and think outside of the box? Probably not, because then we have to come in and clean up a mess typically. And that's kind of what happened with, yeah. And so that's kind of what's happening with Agile. They did a knee jerk. It was a group of individuals that didn't want to have to document a lot of stuff. And I don't know if you're familiar with, oh, his name is escaping me. Shoot, I just thought it a moment ago. He's a use case guru. One of the original authors of the manifesto has been trying to get that that group of people, that world, to recognize and accept the fact that user stories and evaluation and acceptance criteria are not enough in most cases. Alistair Cockburn, I remember it now. So Alistair Cockburn was one of those developers that he was like one of the first few people that got together and created the original Agile Manifesto, and he's trying to tell them that they've lost the spirit of it. And so what happens is I've gone into several organizations that are diehard Agile. I mean, it's almost a religion. They're so intense with Agile, and they must do it this way. And I'm like, do you realize you're not letting Agile be Agile? Yes. Yes. And so I go in and I know that I can tell that it's a religion in that organization. So I can tell that. And I don't want to freak anybody out. So I go in really calmly. I'm like, okay, you want me to help you fix the requirements process because your burn down rate is awful. We've talked about that. So let me just watch, and I watch and I watch and I watch. And so finally, when I had some visuals that would tell the story and not me, I put it together and I had to point out to them that their Agile was their problem. Agile's their problem. And I was like, because you are using your user stories and acceptance criteria as your requirements, and they are not requirements. They're intended to be conversation starters. They're intended to be collaboration initiators. They're not intended to be the official documentation of it. Because when you write a user story and you have this evaluation and acceptance criteria, sometimes evaluation and acceptance criteria can become paragraphical. You can't pass or fail that one thing. Requirements are intended to be written at a testable level. Did this requirement pass? It can't be yes, no, kinda. Ugh. Yep. Triangle. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we're a very instant gratification society anymore, right? I want what I want now. And I don't stop and think about the ramifications later. That's what we've become anymore, and it's just the way society is. So how do you overcome that? And so one of the things that I do, because in that kind of a situation, in the situation I've been in, I can't outright say Agile is your problem. I can't, because that does not go over well at all. So what I wind up doing is I say, I think the intention of Agile is awesome. It's amazing. I totally buy into that, but we need to be agile in our execution of it, meaning sometimes a user story with a line of use of acceptance and evaluation criteria is enough, right? And I can convert that into a requirement in my tool, no problem. Sometimes it requires a little bit more sophistication, and that doesn't mean complication. It means more capable of telling a story, more sophisticated in its delivery of information, so that we ensure that we all are on the same page. And so I believe in truly being agile. I believe in quick iterative delivery of value that we understand collectively and have collaborated on what it means, the only way to do that, based on the complexity of the change we're trying to do, if this one change I'm trying to enact is more complicated, it probably calls for a screen mock-up with a use case associated with it. If I have 20 user stories that are interrelated, why would I ask my developer to try to understand that interrelated connection? Why would I ask them to do that with data? No one thinks that way. People think in pictures. Like more than 75% of our learning, retention, and processing is visual. So, yeah. I mean, it's just basic stuff. So I believe in highly iterative implementation, and I like to not, as soon as we start labeling it waterfall or agile, we start getting into emotion, right? So I try to take the emotion out. I try to just say, hey, let's deliver as much value as quick as we can and make sure that we got it right. And we'll only do the necessary level of detail appropriate for that complexity and criticality. Right? There may be times where we have a yeah, we may have a situation where we've got a highly complex thing, but we got to deliver it fast. And if I do my thing the right way, it might take a month, and maybe we're going to get fined in 2 weeks. Well, okay. In that situation, we do what we got to do. So I believe in doing what's necessary. I don't believe in, I am not a traditionalist. I'm also not crazy, I promise. I might sound like it at times. Um, but it's about, as business analysts, we unfortunately have the highest pressure on us, and a lot of people don't realize that because we're dealing with psychology. We're trying to, I like to call it creative guidance, but it's really manipulation. So yeah, all of them. Yeah. And we have to get all of them to trust us. So, and believe that, and for me, I mean, it's real. And I would like to believe that for every business analyst, it's real. People that do what we do is really frustrating. So most people that stick with it don't do it because it pays great or it gets all kinds of attention and glory. Most of us do it because we want to make a difference. And this is our way of doing that. So we really care. And if we can get them to see that, they listen to us a little bit better, you know? Now they're going to be, one of the things we come up against is fear. And if you've got people they're in an environment with Agile, they know it really, really well, the back of their hand, it's where they live, it's what they know. And they're involved in change, and maybe their personality isn't comfortable with a lot of unknowns. Well, so Agile, even though it's chaotic, because to me it's chaotic because often you don't often know why are we doing this. Now you can have an Agile shop that's doing really, really great, but I can almost promise you they're not only using user stories and acceptance criteria. They're drawing stuff on boards, even if it's not like solidified in writing, which it should be. They're drawing pictures on boards, you know. And so it can be really effective, but the problem is we should be recording it, and that's one of the things that in many traditional Agile shops, they don't give you an opportunity to do. Like you just said, they don't give you the opportunity to document it right. And they don't realize if you're a really good business analyst, especially if you're given the right tools, that can take very little time. It doesn't take that long. Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. Hold on a second. We're almost at a 45.